Good morning, everyone. Those of you that are back home in Texas, thank you for spending your morning with us. Those that are on the East Coast, good afternoon. My name is Zeph Capo. I'm the president of the Texas AFT. And we're here today to talk about the crisis that is currently taking place in our schools. Thank you for joining us. I'm also joined today with a couple of our staffers, Nicole Hill, who's been working on developing the survey results. She'll be walking through those results with us later today. Also, Rob D'Amico, our communications chief, who will be following up with you with links to this casting after we finish, as well as sharing with you the landing page where all of the information and documents that you'll be seeing today is currently posted for you to be able to access at your leisure. With that being said, I doubt it's news to anyone here that our school systems are struggling right now. We hear about it every day, and you've written about it or reported on these situations in areas across the state of Texas and frankly across the country. Public schools are not only facing an immediate public health crisis, they're also facing a potentially devastating staffing crisis, with more and more teachers and school staff being driven out of their jobs by concerns for their safety, workloads that keep increasing, paychecks that stay stagnant, or more frequently, a combination of those things. Well, we surveyed our 65,000 members twice since November, and we're here today to talk about or share those most important and frankly, some of the most disturbing things that we've heard listening to them. I'll start off with the number that worries us the most. In November, on our November survey, with more than 3,800 school employees responding, 66% of them told us that they had considered leaving their job in the past year. 2/3 of responses from people who are not only teachers, but also counselors, librarians, nurses, custodians, and bus drivers, every part of the school employee community. And they've all given serious thought to throwing in the towel. And these aren't folks who hate what they do. They want to stay. They chose these jobs because they care deeply about our kids and our schools and our communities, but they feel like they've got no other choice. And we'll hear from them. We hear from them every day, calling us or their local union presidents in tears because they just don't know if they can keep doing this. And I'd like to turn the floor over to Nicole so that she can walk us through some of the additional survey results.
Thanks, Zeph. So in that same survey from November, we also asked our members what would make them stay. If 66% of them were thinking about leaving their jobs, we asked what would help keep them in the jobs that they love. And nothing here is radical. It is a salary that lets them actually afford to live in the same district they work in. It's a workload that doesn't make them sacrifice every evening and weekend with their own family. It's fully funded schools where they don't have to spend $400 out of their own pocket each year to stock their classrooms. And it's a safe working environment. That's what would keep those 66% of school employees from leaving. This slide shows you the exact responses to the question of what would make you consider staying. 45% of people said pay incentives. So that could be a retention bonus, but more likely an ongoing pay raise. 35% said changes to their workload with fewer responsibilities. 8% said workplace safety improvements. And another 8% said changes to benefits. And as Zeph mentioned, that's not just teachers. That is everybody who works in our schools. And I think what those numbers tell us and what these numbers tell us are that our members are worried about making a living. When we ask them, as you'll see on this slide, what their number one workplace issue was, 35% said salary was their top priority, 24% said workload. When you broaden the scope, likewise, the issues they rank as their top priorities in their communities are also about dollars and cents. It is public school funding. 28% of respondents said that was their number one community issue. Another 12% said college affordability and student debt. It is people's pocketbooks that have them worried right now. And that tells us that school employees' basic needs just aren't being met. And how can we expect them to serve students when they're not being served themselves? There is only so much people can give, and we are on the third school year of a pandemic. They are overextended, and they were overextended for years prior to this pandemic. There's not a lot left in the tank. And all of this was in November. This was a survey we did in October and November of last year, before the latest COVID surge, before the Omicron variant. Last month, we surveyed our members again, so in January, and this time we specifically asked about safety and working conditions. Based on the 2,500 responses to that survey, I think we'd all be surprised if that 66% number weren't significantly higher now.
Only
Zeph.
Thanks. Only 12% of the people who responded to our Omicron survey said they felt safe in their jobs. Think about that, 12%. On that survey, we heard from teachers paying out of their own pocket for N95 masks. We heard from bus drivers covering 2 or 3 routes each day. Nurses left alone with no one available to help, spending 95% of their time testing students and staff for COVID, or trying to do what contact tracing they can. We heard from school employees asked to do the impossible with next to no resources, not even guaranteed paid COVID leave if they themselves got sick. We heard from a special education teacher who spent $100 of her own money on N95s to keep her safe at work. Our members are not asking for the world to turn in a different direction. They're asking to be provided with N95 masks and rapid tests, to be able to take leave when they're sick. This is basic stuff. At the start of this pandemic, we had members being lauded on the cover of Time magazine as heroes. Now politicians are trying to turn them into zeros, to scapegoat them as the reason that students are struggling, to scapegoat them as the reason we aren't back to normal. Ladies and gentlemen, that is a cheap political trick. And as a former teacher and the leader of a union of public school employees, I want to name that trick for what it is. It's a lie. Red state governors like ours here in Texas are pandering to a small group of loud individuals to score points in their primary at the expense of our kids and our public schools. Now you're hearing from me today because our members are busy, hard at work at their own jobs, keeping our schools running and supporting our students. But 4 of them recorded videos about their experiences and may want to play those for you now. You'll also get copies of this video after we're done. But to introduce you to the members who wanted to address you today, we have first Nicolette Balo. She's a pre-kindergarten teacher in Houston ISD. Shauna Pulowski, a 5th grade math teacher in New Caney ISD. Luis Garza, a high school English teacher in McAllen ISD. And George Guba, a teaching assistant for math in Irving ISD. Nicole?
My name is Nicolette Balo, and I've been a teacher for 8 years with HISD. I've taught pre-K through 2nd grade, and I've built a career that I truly expected and hope to carry on through retirement. But over the years, I've come to realize that it is unsustainable, salary-wise, health and safety-wise, especially in the past 2 years. But I'm quitting because of the health and safety concerns.
My name is Shannon. I'm a 5th grade math teacher, and I teach in Southeast Texas. I've been teaching for almost 7 years, started in January 2016. And what we're seeing this year is almost complete abandonment of the safety issues and those things that were put in place to make teachers feel safe, make students feel safe. And it hasn't gone away. In some ways, the pandemic has gotten worse. We got this incredibly contagious variant going around, and lots of people are getting sick. And I think a lot of teachers, myself included, just don't feel safe.
My name is Luis Garza. I'm a teacher at Memorial High School in McAllen, Texas. I teach a whole bunch of different things, mainly English language arts. Well, the safety protocols aren't as strict as they were before. Some of the things that are happening now is We don't really have a mask mandate anymore, which is driving numbers up.
It would be really wonderful if, state leadership could recognize this and look at it the way they were doing at first. Like, oh, this is serious. We need to make sure that everyone feels safe. Teachers feel safe at their jobs. Students feel safe in the place that they go to learn. And instead, what we've got going on is, well, almost like a negative portrayal of teachers who are worried or scared.
Hello, my name is George Cuba. I am a math teaching assistant at Texas AFT Academy, which is in Irving ISD. Some of the challenges I've been seeing in the classroom, of course, has been affecting almost every district at this point, is teacher shortages, and not just shortage of teachers, but just staff in general. My position has been used for coverage, which I'm used to in a sense because I used to be a substitute teacher, so it's not like a brand new. It's nothing daunting, but it's definitely exhausting having to come in every day and not really technically do my job, which is assisting math education.
This is per campus, but on my personal campus, I started off with 26 students in my pre-K class. Now I have 24, and there's no physical way to social distance each student that much. Once we get into teachers being absent, students are placed in other rooms. So at one point in my classroom, I had 48 students for an extended amount of time. Other teachers, one of our ancillary teachers has had 70 plus students for a class to give teachers coverage.
It's just gotten so political. And at first, there was just this outpouring of support for teachers and other people who were just keeping our society afloat. And now it's gotten to where, where teachers are worried and they're speaking out about not feeling safe, that getting kind of a negative portrayal. And we're just trying to do our best, but it's hard to be your best when you're worried and you're worried about the safety of your family and your students. And
they're not backing up teachers when it comes to their professionalism. They're not treating us like professionals. When we go through a lot of different trainings, a lot of different certifications just to be able to teach in the classroom. And unfortunately, the state isn't doing that. They're undermining our profession.
I've heard more than last year, people just having breakdowns or having heightened anxiety. I myself, at the beginning of this school year, I had a seizure. The neurologist said it's like the most likely explanation is stress. And so quite possibly just having to start a full school year in still pandemic conditions eats at you. It demoralizes you essentially.
When teachers are this tired and showing up, this is when mistakes happen and when burnout happens. And children already have social emotional gaps from COVID, and they're showing up to a classroom where there either is no coverage for them and they're being shoved into a different classroom, or there is coverage that's not emotionally ready to take care of 25 plus students and their needs. I feel like I personally am in survival mode. And I know a lot of teachers are back in the first year survival mode, just trying to get by.
What needs to happen is, I want to get back to that sense that we're all working together, because that's what I felt like last year, even though it was scary and we were scrambling to get new stuff out there, new curriculum. Parents and teachers and administrators were all working together in the community. We all felt appreciated. We
have to have leadership from the state providing enough resources for new and experienced teachers. We don't have that right now. We have the state basically attacking teachers and their profession. I love the parents. They support us. They do their best to support their kids at home, and that's what they have been doing, even when we were thrown into chaos years ago. They, a lot of them had to stay home with their kids. The economy was in chaos, but they did their best to support their kids, and they're still doing that now.
Okay, what can we do constructively with parents as well? That's kind of the whole point of a school. It should be a community hub for not just students, but also for parents. It's part of a child's development. It's like the psychological debate of nature versus nurture. I don't think it's either or. I think it's both. And same thing with parents and teachers. I think it's both of them are partaking in the development of the child.
But I want everybody to come together and support teachers like they were. Teachers already were overworked and underpaid.
Being short-staffed wouldn't be too exhausting, if also, generally speaking, our compensation was reflected that, it's, yeah, our pay is not even outpacing inflation. So
Come in and see what we do. Watch us teach. And I think that would help at least give the public an idea of what the reality is.
It's very upsetting that I entered this career knowing that I couldn't have this as a sole income when I have a family. So I put my personal life on hold, as many other teachers do, of course, because I cannot afford a family right now with just a teacher's salary. It's not something we should ask any person in a career to do, let alone the force that is taking care of our children and the front line of caretakers for our children.
Thank you, Nicole. With 12% of our school employees saying they do not feel safe, with 12% of our school employees saying they feel safe going on the job, or when 66% say that they're thinking of resigning or retiring, we don't just have a public health crisis, we have an issue of respect, namely the lack of it from those in charge of the state. And I want you to think about something for a minute. January saw some of the highest rates of staffing being out because they personally themselves were COVID positive. That followed a fall where we saw all fall, what we saw in the news were the back and forth between the courts, the AG's office, and the school districts fighting over mask mandates. So it doesn't surprise anyone, or shouldn't surprise anyone in this room, when we dropped mask mandates, when we started fighting over simple solutions, we were going to exacerbate the problem. We've now turned a masking issue into a staff crisis issue this month that aligned with the Omicron pandemic coming through. The second thing that could have been avoided by those in charge of the state. Think about that pre-K teacher with 26 students in her classroom that says she is quitting at the end of this year. 26 students means that some school district, Houston ISD, and the Texas Education Agency, the school district had to request a waiver, class size waiver, and the state had to grant that class size waiver for her to even still have the 24 students in the room. If we won't hold a student teacher ratio, the 22-to-1 law, during a pandemic, when everybody around us is telling us to be physically distant and careful, that is a lack of respect, and not only for people's pocketbooks, but frankly for their health and their safety. This isn't a new problem. It didn't come in with COVID. This pandemic has just shown a light on issues that have been festering for years, including the lack of respect for our schools and their employees, from the governor's mansion to the legislature. Despite what the talking heads would have you believe, though, that's not the attitude from parents. Parents respect and support public schools, teachers, and staff. Just look at the recent national poll commissioned by AFT. Parents and educators agree. We're in lockstep, and we know our students are best served when we work together. So frankly, it boggles my mind that people like our governor, who are responsible for helping make things better for Texans, would actually try to drive wedges between parents and school leaders and school employees. In fact, parents have never supported public school teachers as much as they do now. We are not divided, even if that's what some politicians would like to make us think. So what we want to do is, what we want our state politicians, we want to do what our state politicians won't do. Listen. Listen to teachers, listen to staff, listen to students and parents. And we want to work together. Here at Texas AFT, we're inviting our parents to join us in demanding better from our state leaders and demanding solutions to the real issues of our school, like safety, supporting students through a crisis, and retaining dedicated, qualified school staff members. We also ask them to join us in voting for candidates in the March 1st primary who will listen to us on these solutions. That's where our attention should be, and that's the work we should be doing together. At this time, we'll take a few questions, and I just want to note you will each receive a copy of the video. We shared earlier links to all of the information, including the survey results and the slide pages on our landing page. And I'm going to open it up for questions. If you could, there's a lot of people on here. If you would use your raise hand tool, that will bring you up to the top of the list so I don't miss anybody. But David, I did see the manual hand there.
Yeah, there you go. Hey, I got a little 4-part question. Okay, and it's not too long. Is there any data on how many teachers have left over the last year and a half, 2 years, left the actual profession? And then the second part is, where are they going? Do we know where they're going, what kind of jobs they're going to, or where they're going into? And then the third part would be, on the supply side of things, are universities producing enough teacher candidates to fill the ranks of those retiring or leaving? And is there, or even just getting enough people certified to become teachers? Is there any data on that? And then the last part, what does the legislature has been asked for at least 4 decades now that I know of, since the 70s probably, for more raises for teachers. What needs to happen in the next legislative session, what's the American Federation of Teachers going to be lobbying for when it comes to increasing pay for teachers, and getting the things that you need to do your job?
Thank you for that question, David. Let me start with some of the facts that, first and foremost, the crisis in the teacher staffing has gotten worse over the last decade. As a matter of fact, one of our partner organizations, Raise Your Hand Texas, recently conducted a survey. You might want to take a look at those headlines, where 50% of every new teacher that we're hiring, 50% of them are leaving after the first year. That's an alarming number. That really puts us in a place where we're not going to be able to keep up with the number of people that are eligible to retire right now. Study after study after study has shown that that students are not entering teacher preparation programs. They're choosing to look elsewhere for that type of work. Those that are currently working are looking at activities. They're looking for anything. Let me just be honest about that. As a matter of fact, I had a colleague of mine that works with the UIL, the Scholastic League. They're posting for office positions, and they've never. The comment was they've never had more teachers applying for what amounts to an administrative assistant position in the past. You have some of our teachers that have invested quite a bit of time and energy in getting degrees in math and science that are able to go into other fields and double their salary. They're often in the Houston area, when there's an opening at any of the plants or refineries, are able to move and leave to double that salary very easily. But oftentimes, they're leaving not just because of the salary. It is because of the respect issue. It is because of the fact that our state has created such a crisis, with how they are telling people how to teach, with the lack of support, with the demeaning attitude, that people don't want to feel like they're completely and solely responsible for everything that's wrong with public education. And that's a huge driver here. As far as what we'll be doing, the very first thing that we're going to be doing, as I spoke to earlier, is we'll take the rest of the spring and the summer holding listening sessions across the state with stakeholders, with parents, with teachers and others, to really ask them to do what the state hasn't done. And that's actually listen to them. Listen to what teachers actually say will help them stay in the classroom. Listen to what bus drivers actually need to actually continue working in their job. Listening to parents. parents that are our partners. Make no mistake about that. They are our partners in education, and finding out what is most important to them so that we can build that into our day-to-day work. Those are some of the things that we will be doing this summer to get ready for the session. It's an absolute shame that the state of Texas, which I believe is the somewhere around the 9th or 10th largest economy in the world, can't even find its way to the average teacher salary in the United States. And that's one of the things that we'll be pushing on. If we can't at least be average in Texas, then we are not setting the bar high enough. Thank you for your question. I think Nick, and then Wayne, and then Jacob. Nick, you're on mute. Okay. All right, let's go on to Wayne, and then we'll come back if we can. Oh, the host must unmute. Nicole, could we just unmute everybody for a second and see what happens? Not sure.
All right, I'm unmuted. Great.
Okay, great.
So we got that. So I'm down in Houston, and I know that you had talked about mask mandates, and we even heard from a teacher in the Houston area that had expressed concern about mask mandates coming to an end. Houston ISD still has a mask mandate in place here. New Jersey governor this morning or this afternoon is going to be ending the school mask mandate in March. Delaware is going to be doing the same. At what point do you think mask mandates should be coming to an end in schools that do have them in Texas? Just wondering your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I do think once we're consistently staying in the yellow zone, that's part of the issue with this is different states are experiencing different levels of the viral load. And once we're consistently in the yellow zone, I think that's a time that we can start looking at it. Certainly, I would want to, again, talk to the county health officials, people like Dr. Hodis, to get best practice advice on when it's safe to really bring down the mask mandates. Clearly, at the height of this Omicron variant rolling around was not the time to stop that mask mandate. But hopefully, once we start lowering our overall loads, we can get to that yellow zone, then we should be able to lift that mandate and try to move on to something, at least the new normal.
A quick follow-up. Dr. Gottlieb over the weekend said that schools need to move to a sense of normalcy for kids and not wait till the summer. They need that normalcy. The mask should come off at this point so that way they can have that. What are your thoughts on that? And then what do you say to parents that say, you're saying it's got to move down to the yellow, but I want my kid to have a sense of normalcy. What do you say to them?
Well, I think that it doesn't necessarily have to be an all or nothing scenario. I think that we should be building better practices, making sure that there are opportunities. Like one of the things that we talked about with school districts the other day, why did we stop using our outside spaces for lunch? So that students had more room, so that they had more time where they could be, if they have had their vaccines, they could be unmasked in an outside area. How do we incorporate more of those opportunities into a school day so that we can get as close to normal as absolutely possible? Again, I will like the numbers speak for themselves. The number of teachers and staff that we had out because they themselves were COVID positive over the last month. Imagine if we didn't have mask mandates in HISD and some of these other districts. I believe those numbers would be much higher because we certainly saw how the lack of mask mandates exacerbated that issue in those other school districts. I would like to be back to normal as well too, but I'm out at a conference today and I'm walking through the streets of the city where I see people masked all the time. It may be that it is part of our new normal to have some level of precautionary measures as we go through this. Wayne and then Jacob.
So my question goes back to some of the statistics you shared from the survey, and unless I misunderstood the first results back in November, it appeared that back then the majority of your members were concerned about money, and the stat showed only 8% were concerned about their safety. But then several weeks later, you jumped to like 88% feeling like they aren't safe. So what you've got literally a 6 to 8 week time span where 4 of those weeks teachers were out. I mean, was this just an overreaction to the 2 weeks of the variant that we went through? Why such a huge shift? And where do you think your members truly stand? How much are they really concerned about safety?
I think that when you move through, and that's why it's almost goes back to Nick's question. This is not a static pandemic. It's dynamic. It's consistently moving with new variants and new pieces coming through, and we've got to have dynamic solutions, and we've got to be ready that there are going to be these changes in attitudes. I think everybody's had them. It's not just our educators. People were starting to feel safer. They were starting to feel like that we'd gotten a large bit of this behind us when everybody started getting vaccinated. Or I shouldn't say everybody, because we still have quite a few holdouts, but more people started getting vaccinated. And then we had a much more contagious, though on the whole, less dangerous in some ways variant come through that brought all of this back to people, brought everything back that we've been dealing with for the last 2 years. On top of the constant discussion about lifting the very few safety measures that we have in place. So I think that it's reasonable that people would have some shifting concerns as we go through these peaks and valleys of responding to this crisis. I think Jacob, and then Danya and Christina.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick things. So I know that a lot of things that you mentioned that teachers in Texas or members of the union are taking issue with originate at the statewide and legislative level. Is there another system, perhaps in another state, that you think it would be better to emulate? Or is it kind of piecemeal things that need to be changed here in Texas?
Jacob, I'm going to be quite honest with you. I don't know if I've had the capacity to really do the deep level of the deep dive into how well many of our other states are doing. Certainly, I think that, that was something I'd really want to talk to the experts about. I don't want to, make a mistake on those things. There are some things that I think that we want to see here in Texas. We want to see some reasonability brought into decisions. We want to see them be less political and more medically based. We want to have people talking about solutions, just as the questioner earlier was talking about parents want their kids being back to normal. Some of our medical professions think that there are ways to do that. Well, then what are those ways? What are those ways that still allow us to keep some level of reign and hopefully control over mitigating factors around this pandemic, but still allow for as much opportunity for people to kind of get back to normal again, like we stated earlier. How do we use the tools that are in our belt, and that could be done much easier if we are really focused on doing a much better job with the funding that we received for COVID relief. Part of what we're seeing is school districts deciding that this is the time to invest in new buildings and do other things. Well, that's all fine, well and good, but if you're not investing in creating new, we actually need you to focus on making sure that the air quality systems are put in place, that that we're actually retaining staff and getting the basics first, testing and masking into the hands of those that want them. I think that would help as well too. If people are asking, if they're paying out of their pocket or digging out of their pocket for these things because they're not getting them at work, and we've been handed millions and billions of dollars to do that, let's start with getting those basic things in place so nobody has to even ask anymore.
Okay, one more thing, if you wouldn't mind. I know that specifically you talked about making the issue less political, but just to touch on the idea of policy for a second, given the current makeup of Texas at the state legislator level, do you right now see a realistic path to that kind of larger scale reform?
I do think that there is a path. It means involving, it means those that are really the solid majority out there have to get engaged and they have to be involved. That's 78% of the parents that we're talking about that know and understand that we're in this together and trying to figure this out, coming to the table, supporting each other, us supporting the parents for what they're doing to try to help their kids through this, them supporting us in the education system, and working and talking together to make that happen. We're all exhausted. We all have multiple things that we're trying to balance as we go through this. But remembering, and it might sound a bit corny, we're only going to get through this when we work together. And I think that's the overriding message that we want to make sure that comes out. You know, it's going to be a tough path. There's no doubt about that. But, you know, we have support from both sides of the political spectrum that really want to see public schools be successful. And those are the individuals that we need to help and support and listen to move forward.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Danya?
Yes, hi. My question goes back to your conversation about, you mentioned some of the ESSER funds, right? Some of the COVID relief. Some districts have been using this money to, apply some retention stipends or bonuses, also increasing the pay for substitutes. What is the overall feeling on that? We know this is obviously temporary and they need to find some more permanent solutions. And then I also had a question about what you just mentioned on the listening sessions. You're going to be going across the state. Will that include any meetings with district officials, trustees, anything like that? Or is it mainly just for your members?
Thank you, Danya. Yeah, I do think that the retention bonuses are helpful. So many of our educators and school staff have frankly taken out of their pocket to try to do what needed to be done to mitigate in the earlier stages of the pandemic, before there was funds and supports and additional things to make these things happen. So some of those retention stipends are almost really focused on kind of bringing people whole through this pandemic. Teachers pull out of their pocket for their students in their classrooms at very high rates every year in a normal year. And they've done more so during the pandemic. So we're definitely in support of those. But yes, your point is well taken. These are temporary. These are one-time funds. If we don't come up with a better systemic resolution at the state level and stop pitting public schools against property taxpayers, then we're not going to come to a good resolution. We've got to really put all solutions on the table. People don't like to talk about them. They don't like to talk about state income taxes. They don't like to talk about other income opportunities that make a difference. But in many ways, this is the way our country was built, is everybody doing a little bit to do their share to make sure that our public services and public spaces are what we all want them to be and meet all of our expectations. As far as the listening tours, we'll be inviting those trustees, we'll be inviting those administrators. I can't guarantee that they will show up, but we are open. We've done this before in the past, about maybe a little over a decade, and we did have good participation. We hope to again. We'll invite people that don't necessarily agree with us, because we want to make sure that everybody truly is listened to and heard. We want to emulate what we expect out of our state government. And once you're elected elected to office, whether you're blue, whether you're red, you represent everyone and you need to listen to everyone. We may not necessarily always agree, and everybody is not going to be happy with the full solutions that we come to, but everybody needs to have a seat at the table to share what their perspectives are, because that's how we get to the best policy. Christina, and then Laura.
Hello, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great, sorry. So yeah, just a New Mexico bill just passed the state senate on Saturday that would, along with an average 7% salary increase for educators, boost average teacher pay in New Mexico to roughly $64K a year. Here in El Paso, as an example, teachers make about $50K an hour. So could this be problematic for education in Texas, and especially at the border? I mean, could we start seeing these Texas teachers moving to other states for higher pay, especially when they're in El Paso? They could just move right over to Cruces, Albuquerque, Santa Fe.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, we have plenty of instances of teachers living in New Mexico and currently working in Texas. It's not just our Texas teachers that would likely be leaving if this passed, but you'll probably see a lot of New Mexico teachers going home, exacerbating that issue on our side of the state line. This is something that we definitely need to look at. I think that they have a good plan that could be something that we look at putting in place in Texas. We'll see how that goes. I will be very curious, and we will certainly be following the staffing patterns that come out of the greater West Texas, El Paso area as this moves through. Laura.
Hello. I do have a question more focused on the restrictions of what type of subjects and topics that teachers are allowed to teach their students now. I mean, there's a, you know, the whole, there was a study that I had read that said it's 17.7 million public school teachers, I mean, public school students in the US have had their learning restricted when it comes to teaching concepts of race, gender, and racism, and a lot of the schools, especially here in Houston, with minority students, we're losing. The shortage is focused on Black teachers. We're losing a lot of Black teachers, and a lot of the Black teachers that I've been able to contact or be able to have conversations with have said that, you know, they don't know if they can do this anymore, because obviously they have to now fight to teach Black history, and this is February. And so are there other things that you know, the state should do, or our community should be doing to be able to not have to, we have all these things that we have to fight with the federal and state, but now as far as the subjects that our students are supposed to learn, what is that being done? What is being done to address that as well?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think that this latest book banning witch hunt episode that the state has gone on when it comes to curricular issues, when it comes to actually teaching about real life is a shame, and it's frankly is a detriment. It's a detriment to all students. You know, let's be real. Things are not perfect. They never have been. They probably never will be, but we don't get better without first realizing and recognizing where things are and how others see things. If we're not spending the time to make sure that we understand each other, then we're not going to be in a better place. You know, I think that we will consistently be fighting for those teachers, fighting with those teachers that frankly, many of them are in fear now. Are they able to deliver this lesson? You know, that they have delivered for many years that may spark controversy or be something that students really have to think about. I mean, heck, you know, it's putting it's putting a bad spotlight on things that shouldn't even be controversial. My goodness, we had some parent turn in you know, turn in a biography book on Michelle Obama because she thought it was going to make other students feel bad. Really? You know, are we that fragile? I mean, these are the same people that are calling people snowflakes, that are making these outlandish allegations. You know, I think that we've gone in the wrong direction in Texas and so many of these other states that are coming up with these pieces. Yes, parents need to understand and be part of that process, know what's going on. Is it to the point where parents should see a year's worth of lesson plans that we've seen coming up in other states? No, that's ridiculous. Frankly, that's a malpractice. Teachers cannot put together a year's worth of lesson plans so that they can be scrutinized and reviewed in such a way, because that's not how classrooms work. You take the first month to actually get to know your students and identify where they are so that you can craft your lessons based on their needs. So clearly we have more people that don't understand how education works, attempting to create laws and policies for problems that have been that are frankly being made up or you know, taken out of context. We will continue to fight for those teachers. We will continue to push back against these restrictive laws. As a matter of fact, we've made a commitment that if any of our teachers are sanctioned for teaching the truth, we will do everything we can to push and support that back, including representing them in court.
Steph, we have a couple of questions in the chat. Crystal Martinez asks, are teachers looking to go back to virtual learning, or what would make teachers feel safer at school? And how is learning loss affecting teachers trying to catch students up?
Yeah, thank you. I don't think it's per se go back to virtual learning, but I do believe it should be something that is not blatantly taken off the table. If we look at the month of January, for instance, could we have drastically reduced the number of COVID cases that were going through our schools and the number of staff that were out, exacerbating the staff shortage? Had we spent a week, you know, gone back to virtual for a week and reintroduced people back in after 2 weeks of holidays where they were probably mingling with a lot of other people, that's parents, students, teachers, everybody, like that's what we do. Would it have been smarter? Would it have been less disruptive to the educational process? Well, possibly. We have some school districts that we'll be taking a closer look at that actually did that. They took some time to go back virtual for several days to try to break this cycle. Does that mean that we want to go back completely? Absolutely not. I think that most teachers prefer to be in person. It is underestimated the struggle that it was to try to teach both in person and virtually at the same time. And it is an underestimation of the amount of time it took for teachers to have to try to adapt to a virtual environment. Frankly, that probably is one of the reasons that we're seeing the staff burnout with the amount of overwork that they're in right now. So that is not optimal, but it shouldn't be something that is absolutely not considered if there are circumstances that looking at the long game, looking down the road might help us avoid what we saw in the month of January.
And sorry there's a couple more in the chat from people who mics aren't working. I don't know what's happening with that, but Wayne asks, what is our takeaway from these stats? In November, we see one thing, in January, we see the opposite. I understand that people's opinions shift, but what is the takeaway for members telling you opposite thing weeks apart?
Yeah, I do think we somewhat addressed that question earlier. Somebody may have gotten that on, that this, you know, this pandemic is not static, it's dynamic. People are consistently shifting. You know, some of this, some of the last surveys, the health and safety survey was taken at the height of the Omicron pandemic moving through. So there's no doubt that it was more of an alarm while we were seeing this, and frankly, while people were dealing with so many of their colleagues being out because they were COVID positive, was certainly on their mind. Will that balance out over time? Hopefully. That's why we're asking for very simple things. We're not asking for the sun, moon, and the stars. We're not asking to go back to complete virtual. What we're asking for is to make sure that everybody who wants them has high quality masks, not some flimsy surgical masks, high quality KN95 masks available, and that they have regular testing that is accessible, not just at the district office, but multiple points across the district so they can actually get to it.
And then can I add one point of clarification on that, Zeph?
Yes.
So for reference, the survey questions on those may look opposite, but they were not exactly the same question. The first question we asked them in November was what would make you stay in education? And what we asked them in January was specifically, do you feel safe? It's entirely possible that people answered those in different ways. Maybe those safety improvements don't mean that they're going to stay long-term, but just for clarification, those were two different questions.
Nicole, thank you for that.
Christina asked, what is the average teacher pay in Texas? Also, you mentioned Texas might follow New Mexico's example of raising teacher pay. Is there specific legislation or efforts you were referring to?
There's not specific legislation as of yet. That we will certainly be pursuing those, certainly be looking at this legislation much deeper, see how it goes across our state lines at our sister state, New Mexico. ALEC's not the only group that can actually pay attention to what people are doing across states, and we'll certainly try to look for good policy that we can actually bring back and put on the table for those stakeholders to respond to that we were referring to earlier. That will certainly be one of them. You probably would be better following up with somebody else, because I think that the average teacher salary in Texas is $53,000, but I'm going to ask Susan, I think in the background, if she could just double check that number for me while we go to the next question. I believe Antonio had a question.
Yes, I'm with Univision in San Antonio, Texas. I remember a time when there was a crisis regarding teachers, that there were not enough teachers. Taking into account what is going on right now, and maybe that we're gonna see even more teachers leaving because all that is going on, what are the chances that you might certify teachers from Mexico? We have a lot here in San Antonio. I know a lot of teachers that the only thing they need is to be certified, and a lot of people in Mexico, they know English already. So because it is mandatory in school, all the way from elementary school all the way to high school in Mexico. So my question is there a chance that you might look into that direction, maybe to bring teachers that might help with a big crisis that is going on here?
Antonio, thank you for that question. It's a great question. We have many of our teachers, current teachers that previously taught in Mexico. They do have to reach the certification guidelines here in the state of Texas. Certainly, we have in the past ease those standards or look for alternative ways to make sure that it happens. But your point is one that I want to be very careful of, that we don't repeat some difficult history. It can't be about, we've got to be very careful in how we do it and making sure that we maintain or increase the standards and expectations, because we cannot do what we did before, which was simply almost wipe away all of our certification requirements just to get somebody in the door, because that's not serving our kids, that's not serving our schools, and frankly, that is not serving the high standards most of our professional teachers that have spent a lot of time, money, and energy of their lives preparing for to do the best job that they can do. So that's the part that has to be the devil's in the details, and we have to be very careful about how we go about doing that. We have a tremendous number of teachers from around the world who's to work in Texas, and some of them, they bring a tremendous amount of value. They bring experiences that kids will never have, because they will, this is maybe the one and only time they have to really build a relationship with somebody from another part of the world. And they're, that goes to Lauren's issues and questions earlier. We want to actually make a more diverse, more open and welcoming society for all of our students, for all of our educators. But we also have seen as well too, frankly, that there's a different level of respect for educators in other parts of the world that make it really difficult for a lot of our teachers, foreign national teachers, to be able to acclimate to, frankly, the brutal environment that they sometimes find in American schools. And that's one of the issues that we have to work on. If we're going to spend taxpayer money going overseas to recruit new teachers to come in, then we need to make sure that we're also creating an environment that retains them once we get here. And this is not just a school system issue. This is a cultural issue. Because there are many places in this country where teachers are looked at and respected in a very different way. I think we have, ultimately, obviously, we've seen it in the stats, we have the respect of our parents. It's just others that consistently stand in the way, whether that's people that have their own agenda, who want to push the privatization agenda within schools, who want to monetize public education dollars. But we certainly have an issue that we've got to reckon with. And that is one that we have to make sure that we have supportive environments to retain people, no matter where they come from. Because this is the same reason why teachers are not, young people are not going into teacher preparation programs anymore.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Zeph, do you have time for a couple more?
I do.
Kimberly asks, why isn't this a fight you take to the individual school districts? Don't they all have COVID money?
You're exactly right. That is part of what we were doing. As a matter of fact, one of our departments has been helping to put together the grievance templates for our school individual locals that are finding them the place where they have to fight this district. Fight on the district level. I mean, we had to fight tooth and nail to get the money actually to the districts. And so now we're finding ourselves where we're having to fight the districts to make sure that they do the right thing, unfortunately. And it shouldn't be that hard. It should be fairly easy. It's really simple. Get people masks and get people testing. It shouldn't be this difficult. And unfortunately, as Kimberly, you all know, we have districts that want to point the finger at the state wants to point the finger at the districts. Meanwhile, we have teachers and students that are stuck in the middle. That's what we're pushing for right now. And you will see probably in a later press briefing where part of the issue that we're working on is doing a deeper analysis with the survey results, trying to identify the top 10 most egregious offender districts, and focusing on putting their issues in writing, putting those particular stories in writing through the dispute process, and making them tell us no, that they won't provide the appropriate level of masking and testing. And let's see how that works out for them in the end, since it really wasn't their money that they received. It was taxpayer money that was intended for this purpose of mitigating these COVID issues.
And David asks, related to the book issue, when it comes to the quote safety concerns mentioned in the poll you referenced, do you have any info on how much of the concern is about parents and others making threats against educators about what's being taught versus COVID related or other issues like kids with guns in school?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that question is really laying out part of the reason why we're in the crisis that we're in, because there are so many different issues that you could point to as to why people are leaving. Certainly, you know, while the majority of kind of the loud minority of parents and others making so much noise about these issues have been directed at school boards. Certainly that is something that each school employee and teacher, bus driver, what have you, are looking at and seeing what's going on, and some of them actually getting it put in their direction. So I can't say that that's not a factor. I don't think it's the main factor for them. Most of what we hear on a day-to-day basis is the overload of work, that they can't take it anymore, that there is a feeling from those in charge that as the teacher said, that they're responsible for, for not being quote unquote back to normal, and like they don't control the pandemic, they don't control the Omicron virus, they don't control the hospital loads. I mean, that's the part of the issue that we have, because the truth of the matter is, we talk about wanting to go back to normal for these school employees, but in so many different industries and so many different people that I talk to, they're still working from home. I mean, it's normal for all of those folks because they're still working from home as long as their kids are going to school. It's not really, we're not really at a place of normal.
David snuck in one last question. That's the last one I see. In light of Antonio's question, does the Texas American Federation of Teachers think Governor Abbott should ask National Guard to help keep classrooms open by subbing like they're doing in New Mexico?
Well, it'd probably be a much better use than keeping them stationed down in the border, demoralized, and the way that things have been going there. They would certainly have an opportunity to be closer to their families and back in their work spots. So I don't know if that's necessarily the best answer, because honestly, I haven't really thought through what the greater impacts of that could be in the state of Texas. I know that we want to focus on making sure that we have qualified people there, not to say that they're not qualified, not to say that they wouldn't be great role models for students to talk with or be exposed to, but we want to make sure that we're focusing on how do we make sure that there are qualified educators in front of the classroom. And that may mean it's more important to up those rates for substitutes so that we can get people in there that have a basic understanding of the work as much as possible. Thank you.
That's all the questions I see.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us with you today. As Kimberly's question brought up, stay tuned for further news as we see how many school districts start to make sure that their staffs are getting those masks and testing, and who gives us the thumb in the nose and tells us no, and we'll be letting you know who they are coming up soon. With that, take care, and thank you for spending your time with us today.